The Valari Union was once proud, peaceful, and advanced. Their cities floated above the clouds, powered by clean energy and surrounded by silver towers that shimmered in the sun. For generations, they believed wars were things of the past. They had forgotten what fear felt like. But that changed the day the Dravok swarm came. At first, it was just a whisper on the communication lines, unknown ships approaching their borders. The Valari sent scouts, polite diplomatic messages, and offers of peace. They waited for a reply that never came. Instead, fire rained from the skies. Within days, their colonies fell one after another. The Valari weren't soldiers. They were builders, thinkers, and scientists. Their ships weren't designed for battle. They were made for exploration and trade. The Dravok didn't care. They came for resources, for domination, for destruction. Now the once bright worlds of the Valari Union were dim and broken. Entire cities lay in ruins, and millions had fled to their home planet, Valara Prime. From my space, the planet still looked beautiful. Blue oceans, green continents, a ring of golden light around its atmosphere. But on the surface, life had turned into a desperate struggle to survive. In their grand council chamber, the leaders of the Valari sat in silence. Around the large oval table, tired faces reflected on the glowing screens showing the latest invasion paths. The Dravok were only weeks away from their final assault. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone knew. The end was near. An elder counselor finally broke the silence. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We cannot fight them any longer. Our fleets are gone. Our defenses are weak. We need to ask for help." Murmurs filled the room. Help? From whom? The nearby civilizations had already refused to get involved. No one wanted to challenge the Dravok. The Valari were alone in the dark. "There is one more option," another leader said softly. "A young species, new to the galactic network. They call themselves humans." The room went quiet again. The word itself felt strange. Humans. The newcomers from a planet officially labeled a death world. The Valari had heard rumors about them. Their homeworld was said to be a violent, chaotic place full of predators, disasters, and endless wars. How could any civilization rise from such a nightmare world? Yet somehow they had. The humans had joined the Galactic Council only a few years ago, bringing stories of survival that made even hardened veterans uneasy. The idea of asking them for help seemed almost laughable. "Deathworlders," one of the council members whispered, shaking her head. "They fight too easily. They destroy what they touch. If we invite them here, what happens if they turn their power on us?" But the elder looked at the collapsing war maps again. "And what happens if we do nothing?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly the council voted. It wasn't a choice made with hope. It was a choice made with desperation. They would send a message to the humans. The message was simple, carried by an old communication probe that limped across the stars. It contained coordinates, a summary of the war, and a single plea. "We ask for aid. We ask for mercy." Once the signal left their system, there was nothing more to do but wait. Days passed. Then weeks. Every hour brought new reports of lost cities and dying ships. The Valari people listened to the skies, hoping to hear a reply, but space stayed silent. In the shelters beneath Valara Prime's capital, life became a constant reminder of how far they had fallen. Families huddled together under dim lights, rationing food and whispering old songs to their children. Soldiers patrolled the skies in damaged crafts, knowing they couldn't win. The Valari had once dreamed of building bridges across galaxies. Now they prayed just to see another sunrise. One night, in the command center of the last orbital station, a young technician noticed something strange. A faint signal appeared on the long-range scanners. It wasn't Dravok, it didn't match any known frequency. At first, she thought it was just static. Then the signal grew stronger, repeating the same rhythm over and over. Her hands shook as she decoded it. "It's a reply," she whispered. "From Earth." The news spread faster than light itself. People rushed into the streets, shouting, crying, embracing each other. For the first time in months, hope flickered. The humans had heard them. The humans were coming, but no one really knew what that meant. The Valari had never worked with humans before. They had only seen their representatives once at a council meeting, speaking boldly and loudly, using strange expressions and unpredictable emotions. Some thought humans were kind, others thought they were dangerous. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Help was help, no matter where it came from. Still, as days turned into weeks again, doubts returned. The Dravok had already entered the system. Valara's defense grid was failing. Would the humans arrive in time? Could they really make a difference against the swarm? The Valari Council met again, this time underground, since the main chamber had been destroyed in an earlier attack. The air was thick with dust and fear. One leader slammed her hand on the table. "We put our faith in them, but they are late. The Dravok will destroy us before any help arrives." The elder, his voice weaker now, simply said, "We asked for help. Now we must trust that they will come." Above them, in the dark void of space, the last Valari patrol ships fought to hold the line. Every day they lost more pilots, more friends. But even as everything burned, a strange feeling began to spread. Among them, a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, something was on its way. Then came the night of the Great Silence. The Dravok fleet pulled back suddenly, disappearing from the scanners. The Valari military thought it was a trick, a trap. But the truth was far stranger. Beyond the far edge of the solar system, the void rippled with light. One by one, enormous ships began to appear, dark silhouettes emerging from hyperspace. First 10, then 50, then hundreds. Their engines glowed blue and gold. Their hulls were marked with the insignia of Earth. The humans had come. The Valari. Astronomers who first saw the arrival didn't believe their instruments. They had expected a few ships, perhaps a small task force or a convoy of supply vessels. Instead, they saw an armada. Thousands of human warships filled the stars, spreading in perfect formation like a wall of steel. But the Valari didn't know that yet. On the planet, people still sat in shelters staring at the sky, unaware of what was happening above them. They didn't know that far beyond their orbit, humanity had already started deploying defense satellites, carrier fleets, and hospital ships. They didn't know that humans had brought not only weapons but doctors, engineers, and rescue teams. At that moment, for the first time since the war began, the balance of power shifted. Down in the Valari capital, a child looked up through a cracked dome and saw a streak of light across the heavens. "Look," he said softly. "The stars are moving." His mother smiled weakly, brushing dust from his hair. Maybe it's just the Dravok. But deep down she hoped it wasn't. Far above, in the command deck of the human flagship, officers worked in silence, scanning the destroyed planet below. The message from the Valari had reached Earth months ago, but when it did, something in humanity stirred. They had seen wars. They had seen loss. They knew what it meant to be desperate. So when the Valari asked for help, the humans didn't send a few aid ships. They sent everything they had. On Earth, when someone calls for help, they don't ask how far, how dangerous, or how costly. They just go. It's built into them, into their history, their instincts, their very nature. That's what makes them human. And now that same spirit had crossed the stars. As the Valari huddled in fear, not knowing if the end was coming or if help would ever arrive, the sky above their world was already filling with the ships of a species that didn't believe in doing anything halfway. The message from Earth had been short, direct, and full of quiet confidence. "We received your call. Hold on. You're not alone anymore." The Valari didn't yet understand what kind of help they had invited. They didn't know that Deathworlders didn't come with small aid or slow diplomacy. When humans answered a call for help, they came with everything: courage, fire, and a promise to stand between the weak and the darkness. The stars around Valara Prime began to glow brighter that night, and though the people below didn't yet realize it, history had already changed. The humans were coming, and they were bringing hope with. The signal from the Valari Union reached Earth quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It came as a weak transmission, full of static and broken words. For a while, no one even noticed it. It was picked up by a listening post orbiting Mars, processed by machines and sent to the United Earth Command as just another data log. But when a translator finally decoded it, the room fell silent. It was a cry for help. The Valari's message was short and desperate. It spoke of destruction, invasion, and extinction. They didn't ask for weapons or soldiers, only aid, any aid, before their world disappeared. There was something in that message that hit humanity deep inside. Maybe it was the tone of helplessness. Maybe it was the fact that they had called Earth at all, when every other world had turned away. The message spread fast through the networks. Within hours, governments, leaders, and scientists were discussing it. Should they respond? Could they even afford to? Earth had only recently become part of the galactic community. Humanity was still finding its place among older, stronger species. They didn't have the same technology or the same resources. Some argued it wasn't Earth's problem. "We're still recovering from our own wars," one of them said during a meeting. "We can't just throw ourselves into another species conflict," but others disagreed. "If we don't help, then what does that make us?" one officer asked quietly. The room went still. Everyone understood the weight of those words. Humans had always been a strange mix of chaos and compassion. They fought fiercely, but they also cared deeply. They had rebuilt their world after destroying it more than once. They knew what it meant to lose everything, and to start again. That night, the world watched as the United Earth Command broadcast a single statement. "The Valari Union has asked for help. We will answer." The decision spread like wildfire. Some called it madness. Others called it bravery. But whatever it was, it woke something powerful inside humanity. Factories switched production lines from civilian goods to military and supply use. Engineers worked day and night, retrofitting ships for deep space deployment. Cargo freighters were converted into medical vessels. Every spaceport across Earth and Mars lit up with activity. The Valari had expected maybe a few ships, a token effort, something symbolic. What they didn't realize was that humanity had a habit of overdoing things. When Earth made a promise, it didn't come halfway. Inside the great shipyards that orbited the moon, massive battle cruisers were being fueled. Crews gathered on the decks, running final checks, packing food and medicine, inspecting armor and flight suits. Some soldiers were nervous. Most were silent. But deep down there was pride. They weren't going to fight for power or territory. They were going because someone had asked for help. That was enough. Across the world, people watched the news in disbelief. There were children standing by the coastlines, pointing at the night sky as bright trails of engines passed overhead. There were families saying silent prayers for the people leaving home, and there were old veterans watching in quiet respect, remembering the times when no one had come to help them. On the day of the departure, Earth's orbit looked like a swarm of light. Thousands of ships aligned into formation. From space, the planet's reflection glowed against the fleets, small, blue, fragile, but defiant. The Armada stretched from the moon to Mars, a sight no human had ever seen before. It wasn't just warships. There were hospital cruisers, supply carriers, construction rigs, and rescue units. The goal wasn't conquest, it was protection, rebuilding, and survival. As the countdown began, a quiet moment settled across every ship. Some soldiers looked out of their windows, whispering a last goodbye to the planet below. Others just closed their eyes, knowing they might not return. But in every heart, there was a single thought, that no one in the universe should have to beg for help and be ignored. The command was given. The engines roared to life, shaking the silence of space. One by one, the ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving streaks of light behind them. Down on Earth, the skies grew calm again, but the world didn't go back to normal. Everyone felt the weight of what had just happened. Humanity had sent an armada, not for war but for mercy. The journey to Valari space would take weeks. Along the way, ships maintained constant communication, running simulations, analyzing reports about the Dravok swarm. The data was grim. The enemy species was ruthless, organized fast, and driven by conquest. They had wiped out multiple civilizations. To fight them meant facing death head-on, but humans had always faced impossible odds. On Earth, they had fought freezing winters, deadly diseases, famine, and storms that could flatten cities. Their world had shaped them into survivors. That's why the galaxy called them Deathworlders. It wasn't an insult, it was a warning. Out there in the dark, sitting in their steel ships, Humans didn't see themselves as monsters or heroes. They saw themselves as people doing what was right. A group of explorers, soldiers, doctors, and engineers, ordinary humans from a world that refused to stay down. Inside one of the carriers, the crew gathered around a holographic map of Valari space. The lights marked the positions of the Dravok fleet. It was enormous, spreading like a shadow across half the system. One of the officers studied the display quietly. "If these readings are right," he said, "they'll reach Valari Prime before we do." No one answered. The silence said everything, but then the commander spoke.
"Then we fly faster," and they did.
Engines were pushed beyond safe limits. Supply ships jumped ahead to clear paths. Every human aboard those vessels knew that if they arrived even 1 hour too late, millions would die. So they didn't stop. They didn't sleep. Meanwhile, back on Valari Prime, the people had no idea of the scale of what was coming. Their sensors couldn't pick up the approaching fleet yet. They thought Earth might send a handful of ships, maybe a small convoy with medicine or food. But the humans weren't bringing small aid. They were bringing everything. Days later, near the edge of Valari space, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace for a final systems check. Before them, a dead zone stretched for light years, ruins of old Valari colonies now cold and lifeless. The sight of it stirred something in the human crews. There was anger, but also sadness. This wasn't just another mission. It was about proving that kindness could still be stronger than cruelty. They adjusted their course toward Valari Prime and prepared for entry. The Armada stretched wider than any Valari sensor could imagine. Carriers, destroyers, cruisers, medical units, all locked together under one command. The stars ahead began to shift as they accelerated. The message they planned to send was already written. Short, simple, and honest. A message that carried all the warmth and determination of an entire world. "We heard you needed help. We're on our way." Back on Earth, the night sky remained full of silent watchers. The world had grown quiet, united by the same feeling. Pride, fear, and hope all mixed together. Parents told their children stories about the stars, about people who went far away to help strangers they had never met. In cities, lights burned late into the night as engineers worked to build more ships just in case. Even people who didn't believe in war felt that what was happening was right. It wasn't about power. It was about doing what no one else dared to do. A few days later, as the human fleet neared the Valari system, the crew began to pick up faint transmissions. Distress calls, emergency beacons. The Valari were still fighting, still holding on, even with no strength left. The sounds filled the command decks, broken voices calling for help that they didn't think would come. The humans listened in silence. Some clenched their fists, some wiped tears from their eyes. They had seen this kind of suffering before, on their own planet, in their own wars. That was why they were here. Then came the final jump. The moment before the engines engaged, a quiet voice broke the tension over the communication link. "Let's show them what it means when humans come to help." And with that, the fleet vanished into hyperspace one last time. For the Valari, the next few hours would feel like eternity. For the humans, it was the calm before the storm. But across both worlds, something greater than fear was growing. A connection between two species that would soon change the galaxy forever. Because when the Valari asked for help, they thought Earth might send a few ships, maybe some diplomats, maybe a few kind words. What they didn't know was that humans don't do small aid. When they come, they bring their hearts, their strength, and everything they have. And out there, racing through the stars, thousands of human ships burned brighter than ever before. An entire armada of hope, heading straight toward a dying world. The Valari sky was gray that morning. Thick clouds covered the light from their twin suns. The air smelled of smoke and metal. From the capital city's broken towers, people looked up, expecting to see Dravok ships coming to finish what they had started. The alarms had already gone off twice that day. Every sound in the sky felt like a warning, but nothing happened. The enemy fleet had stopped advancing. The scanners showed no movement. For the first time in weeks, the Dravok ships were gone from their orbit. It made no sense. They never stopped. They never retreated. The Valari commanders didn't trust it. They thought maybe the swarm was gathering strength for one last massive strike. In the underground command center, the Valari Military Council gathered around a dim holographic map. The lights blinked weakly as one officer pointed at a cluster of signals just beyond their system. These readings appeared an hour ago, he said. At first we thought it was interference, but now they're growing stronger. The elder counselor leaned forward. Dravok reinforcements? The officer hesitated. No, the signature doesn't match. It's something else. No one spoke for a moment. Then another officer whispered the words everyone was afraid to say. Humans? It couldn't be. The Valari had sent the message for help weeks ago, but no one really believed anyone would come. And if someone did, it surely wouldn't be an entire fleet. They expected a few ships, small aid transports, maybe a handful of fighters. But the readings on the hologram told a different story. Whatever was coming was massive. Outside, the people didn't know any of this yet. They were tired, hungry, and afraid. Families huddled in shelters, listening to old radios that played faint signals from the surface. Every message sounded the same, calls for calm, reassurances that the military was doing all it could. But even those voices were trembling now. As the hours passed, the strange signals grew stronger. At first, the Valari could only see faint distortions in their skies like ripples in water. Then suddenly the clouds began to part. One by one, enormous shapes started to appear in orbit, dark silhouettes blotting out the stars. The air trembled as their engines hummed through the atmosphere. The Valari soldiers looked up through their cracked domes and froze. They had never seen ships like these before. Each one was hundreds of meters long, shining with the cold light of steel and energy shields. The sky was full of them, so many that the horizon glowed with blue fire. From the surface it looked like the end of the world. People screamed. Some ran for cover, thinking the Dravok had returned with reinforcements. Others fell to their knees, convinced the gods themselves had come. Every scanner on Valara Prime lit up with alerts. Thousands of ships had just entered their orbit. Then came the message. A calm voice echoed through every communication channel on the planet. This is United Earth Command. We received your distress call. We are here to help. Remain where you are. You are not alone. For a long moment there was silence. No one spoke. Then as the words sank in, the shelters erupted in cheers. Some people cried openly. Others just stood in disbelief. The humans had come. And not just with aid. They had come with an entire armada. Up above, the human fleet moved in perfect coordination. Battlecruisers formed defensive lines. Frigates spread out to cover the planet's surface. Massive carriers released waves of smaller ships. Dropships carrying supplies, engineers, and medical teams. Hospital vessels unfolded like wings, sending signals of safety. It wasn't an invasion. It was salvation. In the Valari Command Center, the officers watched in awe as the sky filled with friendly signatures. The elder counselor could barely speak. They sent all this? For us? Yes, sir, replied one of the officers, eyes wide. And they're still arriving. By then, the Dravok fleet had detected the newcomers. Out beyond the edge of the system, the enemy's scanners came alive. Thousands of insect-like ships shifted their formation. They didn't know what to make of this new arrival. The Dravok had fought many species before, but never humans. To them, Earth was still a minor world, barely worth noticing. They didn't realize what was about to happen. On the human flagship, the bridge buzzed with quiet energy. The crew monitored every transmission, mapping the Valari cities and planning evacuation routes. They weren't here just to fight. They were here to protect, rebuild, and stand between the innocent and the swarm. A communication officer turned to the captain. Dravok fleet detected. They're moving in fast. The captain didn't panic. He simply nodded. Then we'll meet them halfway. Orders spread across the human armada like lightning. Engines flared, weapons powered up, and formations shifted into combat mode. The human ships moved with precision and purpose. They had trained for chaos. They understood fear. And most importantly, they refused to run from it. Down below, the Valari watched as streaks of light crossed their skies. The human ships rose like a wall of fire, heading toward the edge of the system. The people could see the battle begin even from the surface. Tiny flashes of light high above, silent but fierce. For generations, the Valari had believed war was barbaric. They had built a civilization on peace and understanding. But as they watched the humans fight, they saw something different. This wasn't senseless violence. It was protection. It was sacrifice. It was the kind of strength that came from empathy. The Dravok had never faced an enemy like that before. In space, the The battle turned the darkness into daylight. The Dravok ships swarmed like locusts, outnumbering the humans 3-1. But the human fleet held firm. Their ships fought side by side, covering each other, adapting faster than the Dravok could react. Every time the enemy tried a new formation, humans countered it with something unexpected, something the galaxy hadn't seen before. When the Dravok launched boarding pods, humans met them head-on. When they tried to break through the defense line, human destroyers sacrificed themselves to hold the formation. Every explosion painted the sky with courage. Back on Valara Prime, the Valari citizens could only watch and hope. Many gathered outside, staring up at the sky. For the first time, the flashes of light above weren't a sign of their doom. They were a sign of someone fighting for them. Hours passed. The battle raged on. Then slowly the tide began to turn. The Dravok fleet faltered. Their ships broke formation. One by one, their signals disappeared from the scanners. The human ships pressed forward, driving the enemy back beyond the system's edge. When the last Dravok vessel vanished into the void, the stars finally went quiet. The battlefield was full of drifting debris and glowing wreckage, but the human fleet was still standing. On the surface, the Valari listened to the transmissions coming in. Enemy fleet retreating, Valari system secured, people cheered. Tears flowed freely. Families embraced. The nightmare that had haunted them for years was finally over. And yet, even as they celebrated, the humans didn't boast or demand praise. Their first transmissions weren't about victory. They were about relief missions. The moment the skies were safe, the humans began landing ships, medical teams, engineers, and aid workers. They started repairing hospitals, building shelters, and restoring power grids. In the capital city, when the first human shuttle landed, a crowd gathered around it. The hatch opened and a group of humans stepped out, tired, dusty, and calm. They didn't give speeches. They just started unloading supplies. One of them smiled at a Valari child and handed them a piece of bread. That small moment spread across the city like sunlight after a storm. The Valari leaders finally met the human commanders face to face. They expected formal negotiations, rules, and demands. Instead, the humans offered help, without asking for anything in return. "We came because you asked," one of them said simply. That's enough. The Valari didn't know what to say. Their people had been saved by a species they once feared, a species they barely understood. But in that moment, they realized something important. Humans might come from a dangerous world, but that same world had taught them compassion through struggle. That night, the sky above Valara Prime was clear again. The stars shone bright, reflected in the still waters of the ruined city. High above, the human ships formed a protective ring around the planet, their lights flickering like guardians watching over a friend. And somewhere deep in the Valari capital, a child looked up and whispered, "The Deathworlders came to save us." No one corrected them, because it was true the humans hadn't come with small aid. They had come with an armada. Not for conquest, but because they couldn't ignore a call for help. And though the war was over, everyone knew this was only the beginning of something greater. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never look at them the same way again. The calm after the battle didn't last long. The stars were quiet, but everyone in the human fleet knew it wouldn't stay that way. The Dravok were too proud, too ruthless to accept defeat so easily. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the system, they were regrouping. On the surface of Valara Prime, the air still smelled of smoke and burned metal. Cities lay in ruins. Broken towers reached toward the sky like the bones of fallen giants. The people had survived, but they were far from safe. Power was gone in most sectors. Food supplies were low. And while humans had driven the enemy away, everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they came back. Inside one of the human command posts set up near the capital, the officers stood around a glowing map. Dozens of red marks showed new enemy movements near the borders of the system. The Dravok weren't retreating. They were gathering strength for a counterattack. A low hum filled the room as the communications officer read the latest reports. Enemy ships sighted in the outer belt. Estimated thousands. The commander looked at the map, calm but firm. Then we stopped them here. It wasn't just about defending Valari anymore. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy that when humans say they'll help, they don't back down halfway. In orbit, the massive human fleet began to shift formation. Thousands of ships moved like one body, spreading into wide battle lines. Engineers worked without rest, fixing damage from the previous fight. Crews reloaded weapons, patched hulls, and shared what little sleep they could grab. Some hadn't slept in days, but none of them complained. They knew what was coming. Meanwhile, on the planet below, Valari civilians watched the sky with mixed feelings. They had been saved once, but now they feared losing everything again. Yet this time there was something different in their eyes, something new. Hope. They had seen what the humans could do. They had seen the fire in their hearts. They believed that if anyone could stop the Dravok for good, it would be them. Children drew pictures of human ships on the walls of shelters. Old soldiers saluted the sky whenever they heard the low rumble of human engines. The Valari people didn't just see saviors, they saw allies. Up above, as the fleet prepared, the first signs of the enemy appeared. 1,000 crimson signatures flashed on the radar. The Dravok swarm had arrived. Their ships were strange, insect-like, built for speed and destruction. They poured into the system like a tide of darkness, their numbers growing by the minute. The humans didn't move. They waited. The fleet held its line, shields glowing faintly in the black. The silence before battle felt heavy, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the Dravok opened fire. Beams of red energy cut through the void, lighting up space. Explosions rippled across the front lines as debris scattered in every direction. But the humans didn't flinch. Their ships absorbed the first wave, shields blazing bright blue. Then in one coordinated moment they fired back. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of human cannons thundered in unison. Missiles streaked through the darkness, leaving trails of light behind them. The sky became a storm of fire and fury. The Dravok had never seen anything like it. They were used to easy victories, to enemies who begged for mercy. But the humans didn't beg. They fought with a strength that came from somewhere deeper. From the surface, the Valari could see it all. The night sky glowed with flashes of battle. It looked like a storm of stars, beautiful and terrifying. People gathered outside their shelters, staring upward, whispering prayers not just for themselves, but for the humans fighting above. Inside one of the human ships, the crew worked in silence. Every explosion made the deck tremble, but no one stopped. Engineers patched damaged systems while medics treated the injured. They didn't have time for fear. Every second mattered. Every ship mattered. In the middle of the chaos, a small group of Valari officers was allowed aboard one of the human carriers to observe. They were shocked by what they saw. The humans weren't just soldiers, they were problem solvers. Every crisis that hit them, they adapted. Every loss they turned into a lesson. They didn't retreat, they didn't argue, and they didn't panic. They simply worked together like a living machine powered by determination. The Dravok commander, watching from afar, couldn't understand it. He saw his fleet being torn apart but refused to retreat. His species had always been stronger, faster, more brutal. How could these soft creatures from a so-called death world resist them? How could they fight like this, with such unity, such focus, such unrelenting will? The battle lasted hours. The Dravok tried flanking maneuvers, tried to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers, but every time they adapted, human destroyers dove into enemy lines, sacrificing themselves to protect carriers. Frigates shielded damaged allies. And even as ships were destroyed, new formations took their place. One transmission echoed through the fleet channels, short and steady. "Hold the line." Those 3 words carried across every human ship. It wasn't an order. It was a promise. By the time the Dravok realized they were losing, it was too late. Their ships began to break formation, scattering in all directions. The human fleet pressed forward, pushing them out of the system entirely. And then came the final strike. The largest human carrier launched its last barrage, a wave of missiles that tore through the remaining Dravok vessels like thunder. When the light faded, the sky was quiet again. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just watched in silence as the debris drifted away into the darkness. They knew victory always came with a cost. They had lost ships. They had lost people. But they had won something greater, the survival of an entire world. Back on Valera Prime, the people watched as the human fleet sent a signal across the skies. A simple message broadcast in every language. The threat is gone. You are safe. Tears filled the eyes of those who heard it. Across the planet, people came out of hiding. For the first time in years, they could walk under the open sky without fear. The children who had grown up in bunkers saw the sunlight again. The streets that once echoed with alarms now filled with laughter. But even as the Valari began to rebuild, the humans didn't leave. They stayed to help. They sent teams down to clear wreckage, to rebuild homes, to repair power stations. Engineers worked beside Valari workers, sharing tools, sharing food, sharing smiles despite the exhaustion. At night, campfires burned in the ruins of old cities. Humans and Valari sat together trading stories. The Valari were curious about Earth, about the strange world that had shaped these people. When they heard about the storms, the earthquakes, the endless challenges humans faced on their homeworld, they finally understood. Humans didn't fight because they loved violence. They fought because they had learned how to survive anything and how to protect what mattered most. Days later, when the first sunrise after the battle lit up the horizon, the Valari people gathered on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The sky was clear, the waters calm. Above them, they could still see the faint lights of the human fleet watching over the planet like silent guardians. The elder counselor, the one who had first sent the message for help, stood among them. His eyes were full of emotion as he whispered, "We called for help, and they sent an army." Someone beside him smiled softly. No, they sent humanity, and that was true. The humans had shown the galaxy what it meant to care beyond boundaries, beyond fear. They had fought not for glory, not for riches, but simply because someone had asked. The Valari would never forget it. From that day forward, every time they looked at the stars, they remembered the night the Deathworlders came, and how they turned a dying world into a living one again. Even now, the humans didn't rest. They were already planning to secure the nearby systems, to make sure the Dravok never returned. Their commanders sent messages to the Valari Council, promising to stay until every danger was gone. The Valari didn't know how to thank them. How do you thank a species that saves your world and asks for nothing in return? All they could offer was friendship. And for humans, that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the sound of engines filled the air again. Dropships rose slowly from the rebuilt landing zones, heading back toward the fleet. Children waved at them, their small hands reaching toward the sky. And though the humans didn't hear the cheers, they felt them. Because somewhere deep inside, every one of them knew that this moment was why they came. When the Dravok attacked again someday, they'd be ready. But for now, the humans had done what they came to do. They had turned despair into hope. They had reminded the galaxy that the word human didn't just mean dangerous. It also meant compassionate. Because when Deathworlders come to help, they don't send supplies or small aid. They send everything, their ships, their strength, their hearts. And that's what made them different. The battle was over, but silence didn't mean peace. The stars above Valara Prime were quiet again, yet every survivor could still hear the echoes of what had happened. The ground trembled during the fight, and now it felt almost too still, like the world itself was trying to remember how to breathe again. Human ships drifted above the planet. Their hulls scarred, their shields dimmed. They had won, but it hadn't been easy. The cost had been heavy. Too many lives, too many ships gone. Still, no one complained. The humans knew what they had achieved. They hadn't just defended a planet. They had changed the fate of a civilization. On the surface, the Valari people came out of their shelters carefully, afraid the battle might start again. But when they looked up and saw the vast human fleet holding formation in the clear morning sky, something in them changed. They realized they were safe. Truly safe. For the first time in years. The capital city was a mess of broken metal and shattered stone. Streets were filled with dust and smoke. But instead of despair, the sound of life slowly returned. People were talking again. Families were reuniting. For every building that had fallen, there were hands ready to rebuild it. And among them were the humans. They didn't wait for orders. They just started working. Big armored machines from the fleet were brought down to clear rubble. Medics treated the wounded, both Valari and human. Engineers walked the streets, fixing generators, patching power lines, and setting up clean water systems. It didn't matter what species someone was if they were alive. Humans helped them. One old Valari, his eyes clouded with age, stood watching as a group of humans lifted a broken transport shuttle that had been blocking a road. He shook his head slowly, unable to believe it. They fought a war for us, he whispered. And now they rebuild for us. The younger Valari beside him smiled faintly. That's what they do, Elder. They don't just fight, they finish what they start. Up above, the main human command ship was orbiting the planet, transmitting a constant stream of data. The communication screens glowed with messages from across the fleet. Damage reports, casualty lists, and messages of gratitude from the Valari Council. The humans didn't reply with pride or arrogance. They simply said, "We're glad you're safe." That was all that mattered to them. A few days later, the Valari Council invited the human commanders to a ceremony. The hall where they gathered was half destroyed, its roof gone, its walls cracked, but it didn't matter. People filled the room, their faces bright with emotion. When the human delegation entered, the crowd went silent. The Valari leaders rose from their seats and bowed deeply. One of them stepped forward and spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "When we sent our message for help," he said, "we didn't expect an answer. And when the answer came, we thought it would be a small token, maybe a single ship, a few medics. We thought you would send what others did, just enough to make it look like they cared. But you sent everything." He paused, looking at the crowd. "You didn't just defend us, you gave us back our world." The hall filled with applause, not just polite clapping, but real heartfelt noise that echoed off the ruined walls. Some Valari even cried. The humans stood there quietly, their expressions humble. They didn't see themselves as heroes. To them, they had only done what anyone should do. One human officer finally spoke. His voice was calm and steady. "You asked for help. That's all it took. We came because no one deserves to be left alone when they're in danger. That's what being human means." It wasn't a speech filled with grand words, but it struck everyone in that hall like a lightning bolt, because for the Valari, kindness on this scale was new. They had lived in a galaxy where alliances were based on trade, power, or fear, not compassion. And yet, here stood these so-called Deathworlders, creatures born from a dangerous planet, offering help without asking for anything in return. The Valari realized that humans were dangerous not because they were violent, but because they cared too deeply. And that kind of power changed everything. Days turned into weeks. The Valari cities began to recover. New homes were built where ruins had stood. Fields were replanted. Children who had hidden underground were now playing in the sunlight. The humans didn't leave right away. They stayed to make sure everything was stable. They helped organize defenses, trained Valari soldiers, and set up new systems so the Dravok could never invade again. They worked beside the Valari as equals, sharing jokes, sharing meals, sharing stories about Earth. When the Valari heard about the human homeworld, they couldn't believe it. A planet filled with storms, volcanoes, deadly creatures, and unstable climates. And yet humanity had survived, adapted, and thrived. Suddenly they understood why humans fought the way they did. Their strength came from surviving their own world first. One Valari engineer, while repairing a reactor with a human technician, laughed softly and said, "No wonder you're all so hard to defeat. Your planet trained you to fight the universe itself." The human smiled. "We just learned that if something tries to kill us, we make it regret the decision." They both laughed, but beneath the humor was truth. The Valari began to change, inspired by their new allies. They started thinking differently, more boldly, more fearlessly. They didn't just rebuild their cities. They started planning for the future. For the first time in their history, they wanted to reach the stars again, not in fear, but in hope. The day finally came when the human fleet prepared to leave. The Valari gathered in the rebuilt capital to say goodbye. Every street was filled with people. They waved flags, threw petals, and cheered as human ships rose into the sky one by one. The commander of the human Armada stood on the deck of his ship, watching the planet grow smaller in the distance. He didn't feel pride or glory, just quiet satisfaction. The mission was complete. A world had been saved. Down below on the planet's surface, the Valari Council recorded one final message to send to the human fleet. "Earth," it said, "you showed us the meaning of strength. You showed us that compassion is not weakness, but the greatest power of all. You didn't come as conquerors. You came as protectors. You've given us not just survival, but hope. And wherever you go next, remember, Valara will always remember you." When that message played through the fleet's communication channels, there wasn't a single ship where someone didn't stop to listen. Some smiled quietly. Some wiped away tears because that was the real reason they had come, not to win a war, but to remind another species that kindness still mattered. As the fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, streaks of blue light filled the sky. The Valari watched from the surface, their hearts heavy but grateful. Children pointed at the trails of light and whispered stories that would be told for generations, stories about the day the Deathworlders came and saved them all. Time passed. Months later, Valari Prime became stronger than ever. Trade returned, cities flourished, and the stars that once seemed distant now looked full of promise. And in every school, on every wall, there hung a simple image, a human hand and a Valari hand joined together. Beneath it were written the words that the humans had said during the ceremony. No one deserves to be left alone when they're in danger. Those words became a part of their culture. They were carved into stone monuments, written in songs and passed from parents to children. Because the Valari knew those words weren't just a statement, they were the truth. Elsewhere in the galaxy, stories of what had happened on Valara spread. Some species were shocked. Others were inspired. A few were frightened. The Dravok Empire, broken and humiliated, retreated into hiding, whispering about the humans, the Deathworlders who had fought like storms and rebuilt like angels. And far away, back on Earth, people watched the stars and smiled. They didn't do it for fame. They didn't do it for power. They did it because it was right. Because that's what humanity does. When someone cries for help, they don't send a small team or a few supplies. They send everything. Their strength, their compassion, their entire heart. And long after their ships vanished from Valari skies, the echo of their presence remained. A promise written among the stars that if anyone, anywhere, ever needed help again, humanity would come not with words, not with excuses, but with an armada. Because that's how Deathworlders show they care. Years passed after the great battle of Valara Prime. Time healed the wounds of the war, but the memory of what happened never faded. The Valari people still spoke about that day as if it had happened yesterday, the day the Deathworlders came. And everything changed, for generations. Their elders told the story around campfires and in classrooms. Children listened with wide eyes as they heard how the skies had once burned with human ships, how the earth had shaken when the Dravok fell, and how humanity had rebuilt their broken world with their own hands. But what stayed most in their hearts wasn't the fire or the power, it was the kindness, the way humans had treated them like equals, the way they stayed after the fight, helping, teaching, guiding. The Valari no longer looked at the stars with fear. Now they looked with hope, because they knew someone out there was watching, someone who would answer if the galaxy ever cried out for help again. Across the stars, the story spread like a spark in the dark. Many species didn't believe it at first. They said it was an exaggeration, a myth told to make humans look noble. But the Valari had proof, transmissions, photos, and records of the human armada that had saved them. And soon, other worlds began to believe. Some saw it as a symbol of hope, others saw it as a warning. Because the truth about humans was now clear, they were dangerous, but not for the reasons everyone thought. They were dangerous because they cared too much, too deeply, and once they made a promise, nothing in the universe could stop them from keeping it. On Earth, life went on as usual. People still went to work, built families, and dreamed of the stars. The war with the Dravok had become just one chapter in humanity's long story. But those who had been part of it carried something inside them, a quiet pride, a shared bond that words couldn't describe. In quiet moments, they remembered the faces of the Valari, the smiles, the tears, the gratitude. Some had left small tokens on the surface of Valara before departing. A flag, a hand-carved plaque, a few words written in both languages. You are not alone. Those words became sacred on Valara Prime. Every year, the Valari held a day of remembrance called the Day of the Blue Light, honoring the day when the human ships had appeared in their sky. The people would gather under the open stars, releasing glowing lanterns into the night, each one symbolizing a human ship that had protected them. Children would ask their parents, "Will the humans ever come back?" And their parents would smile and say, "They will come if someone needs them." That's what they do. It wasn't just a belief, it had become a truth of the galaxy. Meanwhile, on the edges of known space, new threats were rising. Pirates, warlords, and forgotten empires were stirring again, testing the limits of peace. The Dravok swarm had never fully vanished. They hid in the shadows, rebuilding, whispering of vengeance. But they never dared approach Valara again. The memory of what the humans had done there still haunted them. They remembered how the sky had burned and how no amount of numbers could break the will of humanity. The humans, though, didn't boast about their power. They didn't send messages declaring dominance or victory. Instead, they built something new. They called it the Alliance of Kindred Worlds, a network of planets that believed in mutual protection and compassion above politics or profit. Valara Prime was the first to join. Within a few years, other species followed, inspired by their story. The humans didn't lead through fear. They led through trust. Meetings between human officers and alien diplomats became common. Old enemies began to talk, and slowly something beautiful started to happen. The galaxy began to heal. On Valara, the younger generation grew up learning human languages. Their schools taught about Earth's history, the struggles, the wars, the perseverance. They learned about the humans' long path from chaos to unity, and how that same spirit had saved them. In every classroom, one quote was written on the wall: "Strength means nothing if it is not used to protect." It was something a human officer had said during the rebuilding days, and now it was part of Valari culture. Years later, when trade ships from Earth returned, they found a changed world. Cities that had once been in ruins now gleamed with silver towers and green parks. The Valari had rebuilt stronger than before, and when the human crews stepped out of their ships, the streets erupted with cheers. People threw flowers, children carried banners, and the air filled with music. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a family coming back together. The Valari leader met the human captain on the steps of the rebuilt council hall. He held out his hand, smiling. "Welcome home," he said, and the human smiled back, because in that moment that's exactly what it felt like. Over time, Earth and Valara became partners in every sense. They shared technology, science, and culture. Valari artists painted massive murals of the first human fleet, ships glowing like angels above their world. Human engineers helped them build new cities that blended both species designs, organic and metallic, delicate and strong. It was the kind of friendship that legends are made of, but even legends evolve. As the years went on, humans didn't stop helping others. Whenever a distress signal reached them, the response was always the same. Fleets would mobilize, supplies would be loaded, and within days the skies above that world would fill with light. Other species started calling it the human promise. A promise that wherever there was need, the Deathworlders would come not for conquest, but for compassion. And it wasn't just the soldiers anymore. Scientists, doctors, teachers, all kinds of people volunteered to go. Because helping others had become part of humanity's identity. It wasn't an order. It was who they were. Across the galaxy, monuments were built in their honor. Not out of fear, but gratitude. Some were simple statues. Others were entire parks or space stations dedicated to peace. And on the largest of them all, carved in both human and Valari script, were the same words that started it all. "We heard you needed help. We brought everyone." Even after decades, that line still made hearts tremble, because it captured everything humanity stood for. Their boldness, their heart, their unstoppable drive to protect what was good in the universe. One quiet evening on Valara Prime, under a soft purple sky, a group of children sat by the sea. They were too young to remember the war, but they knew the story by heart. One of them looked up at the stars and said softly, "Do you think they're out there right now?" Another nodded. "They always are. Maybe helping someone else." The first child smiled, eyes glowing with reflection of the starlight. "Then I hope one day we can help them back." That was how deep the bond had become. Humanity hadn't just saved a world, they had inspired one. The Valari had learned what it meant to be strong, not through fear, but through kindness. They carried that lesson forward, teaching it to every generation that followed. And as more years passed, when people across the galaxy spoke about humans, they no longer called them just Deathworlders. They called them guardians of the stars, because wherever there was darkness, they brought light. Wherever there was despair, they brought hope. And wherever someone cried for help, they didn't send a single ship or a polite message. They sent an armada, Not out of pride, not out of power, but because they cared. Because that's what humans do best. Even now, centuries later, when new civilizations rise and old ones fade, the story of Valara Prime remains one of the most told tales in the galaxy, not as a story of war, but as a story of compassion, of what happens when the most dangerous species in the universe chooses to fight. Not to destroy, but to protect, and somewhere, far beyond the edge of known space, a new distress call echoes into the void. A weak signal, trembling and desperate, from a world facing extinction. It drifts through darkness for weeks before reaching an outpost, an old human station still scanning the stars after all these years. A technician listens to the static, frowns then smiles as the words become clear. It's a plea for help. He turns to his commander and says softly, "We've got another one." The commander looks out at the stars, eyes steady, and nods. "Then let's get moving." Moments later, engines roar to life. Lights flicker across the fleet. Messages spread through channels, short, powerful, and familiar. 3 simple words that every corner of the galaxy now knows: we're coming, together. And once again, the skies will blaze with the light of human ships, proof that no matter how many years pass, no matter how vast the universe becomes, the heart of humanity will never change. Because Deathworlders don't do small aid. They send armadas. And in doing so, they remind the universe what it truly means to be alive.